Hello and welcome to Talking Events, the event industry podcast brought to you by Event Industry News, being recorded today from the Ticketscript offices in the heart of London and in the heart of the Silicon Roundabout district, I suppose as we refer to it, where an awful lot of fantastic event companies now base themselves. Thanks very much to the guys from Ticketscript for allowing us to set up the studio and record the podcasts from their offices. Today's episode looking at access control management. Joining the podcast today from Ticketscript, we welcome Toby Dier. Toby, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
From Intellytics, we welcome Carl Martin. Carl, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure.
And from Ticketea, Ross Melinn. Ross, thanks for joining Talking Events.
Thanks for having me, James.
Let's dive straight in and ask a simple question. What is access control management? What do we mean by it, and how does it affect organisers? Who wants to pick up the baton and run with this one?
Can I go first? Is that all right?
Certainly.
Fire away, Ross.
I think the best way to describe it is a fancy barcode. It's an elaborate barcode that means now people can facilitate better access control, which is literally entry into an event, but also monitoring around event as well, to ensure you can track people in real-time data, which for event organisers is essentially important in this day and age.
Toby?
I think you're completely right. I think data these days is completely valuable. I mean, for post-event reporting as well, it's fantastic to be able to see when your clients arrive on site, what they're doing around site, and that can even help you with staffing levels as well.
Absolutely. And Carl, so when somebody comes to you and says, what is access control management? How does it impact on what you actually offer?
Well, it's allowing the promoter to control his event. It's allowing him to monitor the crowds. It's allowing him... Funny enough, Intellytics really got off the ground in the US because people were having real problems with scalpers and fraud and stuff like that. RFID and access control has stopped that, and now it's beginning to come into Europe.
So fundamentally, we're talking about when we're talking about access control management, of a way of identifying ways to reduce fraud, to minimise forgery, to improve security, to reduce unwanted secondary sales of tickets. So are those the sort of elements that we're talking about?
Exactly.
Very much so.
So isn't all secondary ticketing unwanted?
I think that's a subject for a completely for another episode, and we'd be delighted to have you back to offer any opinion on that one. So how is it being improved, and how has it improved already, and where can it be improved further on? So where were we 10 years ago? Carl, I'm looking at you, don't take that in as any sort of hidden, but looking back in the industry, what were the problems that we used to face, and how have the modern ticketing methods allowed us to combat some of those issues?
We're not a ticketing company.
Okay.
We're a company that produces RFID software and hardware, and we were the original, and we've developed it over the years. 10 years ago, really people were just talking about it. You know, it's the last 4 or 5 years where it's grown, and it's grown like Topsy. You know, somebody's opened a box and away it's gone. It is a rapidly developing industry, which you can see improvements in monthly almost.
I think the point of any technology itself is that, well, the definition of technology is the application of processes, especially in industry, to make our lives easier.
Okay.
And we have this innate personality as human beings to surround ourselves by luxury, to make those processes a lot simpler, and that's exactly what access control does. It makes an event run smoother and a lot simpler for an actual organiser to keep track of all stakeholders within an event itself.
If you don't mind me dwelling on it for a second then, Colin, and specifically what it is that you do, when we talk about RFID and as a term has been around in the industry now for a few years, and I think it's fair to say most people in the industry understand the basic concept at the very least of what it is. Just tell us exactly what Intellytics does and what it provides. Can you surmise that in a nutshell so that people understand exactly what it is you can offer?
Yeah, RFID basically is fundamentally a wee chip that goes onto a wristband or a card. More often a wristband because that's more secure. And on that chip, information is placed, and it is only information that can be read by certain apparatus.
Sure. Okay.
And so it allows you, for instance, if you've got a VIP going to an event, that VIP can come through the gates with the rest of the GA, the general audience, but then he or she can go into an area where there's a restriction. So you can build on these chips, various zones of access.
Of course,
and we don't talk about ticketing anymore now. We talk because this confuses people. It's not to say there isn't a need for ticketing companies, because there is, because somebody has to sell the entry. But it's when somebody wants to enter, they've got a chip on a wristband, which is secure, because it's more than access control. It's now cashless as well. So that chip has got in it their money.
Because the means of entry nowadays, even when you say the word ticket, is not necessarily the rectangular ticket anymore, is it? Ticketing is a process rather than the selling of a physical ticket now, isn't it?
Yeah,
exactly.
Very much so.
And how is that? And we've all seen that the ability to deploy tickets in a digital platform, so using people's mobile phones and tapping into what inherently people are carrying around in their pockets now. How has it affected people's attitudes to how they buy the tickets, and how that then impacts on access control, and has it overcomplicated? Has it been a while to adjust the complication of using digital ticketing?
I think this should be one of the biggest topics within today's subject, is actually the adoption of things like RFID itself. I mean, it's only the last 10 years really that online ticket sales itself has soared. Gone are the days where you turn up to a box office at a physical venue itself to buy a ticket. Places like Denmark, they still do that. They have completely different ticketing rules to the rest of Europe, and that stops the secondary market itself as well. So the point I'm trying to make is that in terms of, say, online sales for ticketing, people are still struggling to adopt that. And I mean, I'm talking about Gen Xers as well, the older generation that still maybe don't know the ins and outs of computers, or as soon as you mention the word technology, it scares people off. So I think the importance of not just ticketing, but the common theme through access control, registrations, whatever you want to call it, is the education of adoption, and then educating people as to why this can facilitate better events and make their life easier as well.
Toby, nodding when he mentions the words educate, this is obviously something that you're keen to back up as well, is it?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, 5 years ago, when I first started at Ticketscript, we were noticing that the main people that were using, for example, mobile ticketing, which is obviously another form of distribution, it was mainly students. So we're talking in the sort of kind of 18 to 25 range. Now, last year, we're looking at 50-50. So it really, really is taking off.
Has the adoption of ticketing, not just within the events industry, but for things like airlines and using, apps to actually have your boarding pass on there, has the adoption of ticketing on a wider scale helped the event industry when it comes to adopting these new technologies?
No.
Really?
I don't think so. Because if you look at the major use of RFID for access control, etc., is festival sites.
Right.
And large sports events. And people are loath to take a smartphone into that environment, which is why, the chip rules, frankly, or it will do.
For the purposes of the camera as well, and to back him up what you're saying, a bit of shameless self-promotion, I've brought Ticketea's wristband, RFID wristband, that we've just brought along as well.
For those of you listening to the podcast, we'll put we'll tweet a photo out as well. So if you check the Twitter feed, we'll take a photo of that.
Exactly, and just the practicality of wearing that on your wrist, as opposed to carrying a smartphone or having a PDF ticket, a paper print at home ticket to enter an event, is the security levels of it, the practicality of it, the ease of access, is why access control exists, and it's literally to make people's lives easier.
What's the process now for people that may be unfamiliar with it, for event organisers who have thought about it but who have yet to really go for it fully for fear of not understanding the process? How are these actually issued out to people in advance? How would they turn up at the gate of an event with that?
Well, there's two ways. There's the swap situation where people turn up to the gate with either their phone or a piece of paper or an email or whatever that says who they are, and there's a code on there, and there's a swap done for that piece of paper or that telephone into a wristband. There is an ID check as well, which is a further thing for security. Or there's the alternative which we're doing more and more, which is fulfillment, where people actually get sent their wristband beforehand. So they can register the wristband, it's theirs, they can put money on it, and it's safe. So they arrive, and all they've got to do, the first time they go through the portals or the gates, and they register, they just tap their wristband against the reader, they're registered, and that thing is live, and off they go.
So on a similar train of thought, when we asked about the adoption of ticketing in a broader way outside the event industry, the adoption, particularly recently, of contactless payments. We've had the Oyster system in London for a long time now, but more recently things like Apple Pay and contactless card payments seem to have really boomed. In the last 6 to 12 months, I've noticed more and more people using contactless card payments. Again, as people understand those processes more in everyday life, does it help the event industry in promoting these sort of these processes?
I'd say so. I mean, simply for the fact, if you go for cashless payments with your access control, say you for festivals, ticket sales is not their biggest revenue. Bar sales are, drink sales are, people drinking at a festival. So if somebody has the facility to prepay a wristband and have no idea of what they're tracking, it sounds a bit conniving, but it's not at all, because you're up front with the customer completely. Generally, they're going to spend more money by tapping their wristband than they would physically giving out cash or paying by debit card. And that's another, obviously, USP that you would approach an event organiser with.
Do these processes actually help the speed of ingress and egress from
Oh yeah,
the site?
100%.
You think?
Yeah. I mean, when fingers crossed everything's working well, we can get people through the portal in about 3 seconds. You know, and all you've got is the stewards on the lands on the airside, so to speak, watching, and if a light goes red, they stop the person, they check it again. If it's not right, then they're funneled into a customer service area where they're dealt with swiftly. But when you're pulling people through, you know, and you've got a gate, Coachella, for instance, which is one
sure,
of the ones
yes,
we do.
and it's, you know, within the industry, it's known for having adopted
Yeah.
contactless and RFID for a number of years now,
Yeah.
and was one of the pioneers.
And it was one of our first, and the crowds just coming through, and in Europe for Tomorrowland. 85,000 people, and they're just streaming through. There's not queues; they're just coming through.
Fingers crossed, everything works though.
Well,
when it doesn't,
There's fail-safes, obviously, as
Yeah.
software companies, we have set fail-safes in place, and it's not about going back to dinosaur techniques. We've always got things planned to ensure. I mean, access control itself is just another form of a PDA scanner scanning a QR code
Yeah.
itself. So if something goes wrong, we have backups for that.
And we have the capability, for instance, if power goes down or the internet fails, we can still get people through our portals, through our gates for 45 minutes.
one of the big things relating to digital ticketing, to digital access control and management, and being able to digitally monitor where people are going within a site, is the data that it generates. And this is something that has been addressed and talked about on previous episodes of the podcast, is the importance now placed on the generation and the capture of data by event organisers who want to know who their audience are, where they've come from, how they've found them, what they're doing. How easy is it for them to monitor this in both real time and post-event? Can they utilise something like the data that's captured during the process of using Ticketscript as a means to purchase their ticket? Can they use that actually in real time when the event is live, or is that really something they're going to have to reflect on afterwards?
I think it's more of a pre-event situation, if I'm honest with you. So, for example, with Ticketscript, you'll be able to tell where a client has come from, the processes they've gone through online, how they've arrived at, for example, a client's website, the purchase method they use, and then we can track them around site, so we can see when they arrived on site, how they've interacted, where they've been, heat mapping them, and once they've exited, we can tell what time they exited, etc., etc., and indeed what gate, and then we can give that information back to a client, and they can then really kind of use that as a marketing tool, and it also helps staff their event as well.
Sorry, to back Toby up as well, which I probably shouldn't do with the competition on air. But in terms of live reporting itself, I used to work for a corporate events organiser, and none of this ever existed. And you had to go back when you're trying to re-sign an exhibitor for next year's event. You had no hard evidence to say why you should rebook for £17,000 sponsorship package 12 months away from the next event again. You haven't even seen returns yet in terms of lead follow-up from the event. So if you can give someone real-time data and say, well, actually, no, you had a constant stream of people to your stall, you had these many people in your workshop listening to such and such give this presentation, and actually deliver this hard evidence, paper-based or digitally, to a sponsor, to an exhibitor, and say, look, well, here's the facts, you're going to rebook now, aren't you?
Now you've mentioned, actually, we're starting to look into the broader event industry. Sorry, Carl, you make a point there before we move on.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to make a point. Real-time all of this information's there for the promoters when they're on site. So security can be checking out where numbers are, if a venue's getting too busy. One of our clients actually looks to see what the bar taking's on when certain acts are on stage. And if the bar take goes up, he books that act again.
Well, why wouldn't you?
Because the people weren't interested in watching the act, they were drinking more.
And is there an ability, something I was keen to ask, is there an ability then to also engage with, let's say, the crowd management company?
Yep.
Or, you know, is there an ability to use something like RFID to actually engage with the crowd management company to monitor where people are going and how they're moving within a site, and using the simple sort of tap check-in function where if they're moving into a certain area?
Not only in but out as well.
Right. Okay. So that information.
So you know what the movement's there, and the movement's the reports are live, and as Toby was saying earlier, you know, that information's there now. It wasn't.
If you look at some of the clients that we work with as well, say within live music, and the reason this is so important is for capacity management, and because we live in an ever-increasing politically correct world where health and safety is scrutinised at every single moment, especially at a public event where people's health could potentially be under risk through alcohol, through anything like that. This information is essentially important to give to the correct authorities, a health and safety officer, even the police, for capacity management, especially because of licensing as well. If you go 5 people over a capacity, police find out about that, you'll probably be shut down and fined thousands upon thousands of pounds.
And it does come down to minute details now, doesn't it? Minute numbers, and it's no longer relying on the security guy with his clicker in one hand in and in the left hand out.
You'll still see people using those though.
Yeah.
There's your fail safe.
Yeah, exactly. But that's the education we're talking about as well. People feel that is a fail safe, but there are better processes in place, and again it just comes down to education.
I'm curious to know from all three of you what the user feedback has been like. So we're talking about the actual customers themselves. You know, we're in probably at a point now where this process in the digital ticketing and digital access control and RFID is at a point now where we can now reflect on user experience and user feedback. What have the customers of events actually said in response to using these processes? What feedback examples have you guys got?
Initially, when you introduce something like this to market, for some people it's quite obtrusive. They don't like, even with PDA scanners, sticking a scanner in someone's face, especially in European countries, i.e. Germany, they don't like that obtrusion of personal space. So educating again people why it's important, and then when they actually start to use it is when they realise actually the practicality of it. So you can talk about it as much as you want, but until someone actually uses it, they're not going to realise how special it actually is.
One thing promoters are, particularly in the European festivals, they will educate the people as much as they can beforehand. And you know, in the UK, it's the same. People buy their entry, their ticket, with respect, and then they start to get the information. If there's a fulfilment done where the wristband goes to them, they get a piece of paper in there explaining everything that's going on. There's websites, there's lines they can go to be helped. So by the time they get on site, they're aware of what is going to go on. And when you ask how do people react, we do a festival called Snowbombing in Meyerhofen in Austria, where the town is taken over basically, but there are still lots and lots of shops and restaurants that aren't involved with the promoter, but they're actually coming to the promoter now and saying, can you put readers into our...
They see the value in it.
Our place, yeah. So that, because people are coming in and saying, well, what can't I pay with my wristband? Oh, forget it. So the town is actually saying, we want involved. There's another festival up north, which is on like a national trust land, and they have their own museum and bars and shops and things. They want to be part of it. So people do see the use of it.
The practicality speaks for itself when you look at things like Edinburgh Fringe. Greater Manchester Fringe Festival is 35,000 people in 36 different venues. So to facilitate all that through, say, one central hub, you're going to need something that tracks people properly in different locations across a massive city. And that, obviously that's where access control, RFID, can come in perfectly.
So even if it can be a free event, that you can still use it to your advantage. To actually monitor which venues people have gone in and out of, and how they could be tracked and their movements. what we touched on some European events, Carl.
Yeah.
Again, to all three of you, is there a major contrast and a major difference between the adoption of some of these processes and technologies from country to country, just in Europe alone? I mean, are we seeing some that have really gone, yeah, we like it, and others who are really sort of lagging behind a little bit?
I mean, yeah, totally. I mean, you know, we obviously started off in Amsterdam 11 years ago now, and they were a big adapter of mobile technology, and you know, they're really at the forefront of using it at the moment. I would say we're a couple of years behind them. We need a little bit of catching up to do.
Okay.
It's interesting you should say about Holland. One of the problems for RFID, for cashless people like ourselves in Holland, is they still want the token. Because typically the Dutch will go to a festival, for instance, in a group of people, and there's one person that goes and gets the drinks all the time. There's a big pile of tokens on the table, but he goes and gets the drinks. Quite why? I don't know.
That's a cultural thing.
Yeah.
Well, Fat Boy Slim Smile High Club and Tobacco Dock still do the beer token things.
Yeah.
And you get a wristband on the door for, say, VIP or different segments that you're allowed into, but then you have to go buy beer tokens to go purchase a beer from the bar, when you can facilitate everything in one place. I mean, am I missing something here?
No.
It sounds really, really simple to me.
Yeah, they're
funny.
making a problem with it.
The caterers are the people who are picking it up better than the promoters. A lot of promoters are going, well, you know, let's have more proof. Let's see who else is using it. Caterers are knocking the door down. You know, we want this because they know it improves sales. They know it improves their cash flow, because the cash doesn't flow out. It goes into the till through RFID, so they know what they're getting. You know, there isn't theft. They build, typically nowadays caterers will build in a tip for the staff, so the staff know they're going to get something out of it. Everybody's happy.
I think geographically as well, back to your question, if you follow obviously the major festivals around Europe, so we can look at what Croatia now, Czech Republic, obviously Spain is huge, south coast of Spain. It's generally where these countries that are adopting it better, because it's already in practical use and people are seeing it in en masse about how good it is. So geographically, I'd say the Eastern European countries such as Croatia, Czech Republic, obviously Hungary, of course, where Intellytics based.
And Siget Festival in Hungary were the first to adopt cashless.
And RFID and sort of contactless as a concept.
Yeah.
Moving it away from the cashless payment side of things and back to the access, what level of interaction do you have from a production side when you're dealing with the access of staff into an event or production crew into an event? Because major events will have hundreds and sometimes thousands of actual staff that are moving on and off site, as well as thousands of customers themselves. How much work do you guys do with that side of things?
I mean, me personally, a great deal. I mean, accreditation's a big part of our business.
Sure.
I mean, whilst we do sell a lot of tickets for events, we also send out invitations to all of the staff and all of the artists. So days before the event actually takes place, we'll be on site setting up a wireless network, setting up an access control solution for everyone to get accredited.
Is this something that specifically in Ticketscript's own case that people don't realise sometimes? They think it's really sort of the public facing side of thing and the consumer side rather than the staff access.
I mean, it completely depends on how the client wishes to use our platform, but it is one thing that we do a lot of that I don't think the general public would know.
Absolutely. And Carl, presumably the RFID, the wristband concept, and having the chip in there and allowing, you mentioned VIPs moving from one, being able to come in through general admission then into a certain area, the same can apply for production?
Right across the board. You know, it
Press
goes,
as well.
It's everybody. Everybody that's on that site will have a wristband and will have the restrictions or the access as and how they need it. Staff, for instance, their meals will be loaded onto it. So whether it's a lighting guy, whether it's a steward, whether it's a runner, you know, they've all got the access. You've got the control, and also. You know, the management feel better because they know where these people are. They know when they're on and off site.
Is there a danger, and this is something I wanted to ask today, is there a danger that by reducing the human element involved in access control, by making it digital, by scanning a terminal or touching a terminal, that by removing the human element there is perhaps an unknown margin for error? because there's less human contact, and also that people coming to an event ultimately are there for some form of human contact, and it could be detrimental to an event by reducing the element of person-to-person interaction that's taking place.
I think the idea is that it's supposed to facilitate networking better. So we're through the doors, we're actually on the site itself, and you want to... I'm going to use Tomorrowland as an example because I went years ago and I was fascinated by how many Facebook friends I got just by touching watch to watch, which does facilitate better networking itself. And sometimes, for example, you might meet somebody, end up having too many beers, never see that person again. But because you had this bit of technology, you can keep in contact with that person 365 days of the year now, if you so wish, if they haven't blocked you on Facebook. In terms of the lack of human element, I think technology itself has taken away from that, and I don't think you should be looking at, say, event technology as a distraction of that or as a precursor of that. I think we should be looking at social media, things like Facebook and Twitter, that are taking away the human element itself. But again, that's a matter of perception and how you look at it. Some people think it facilitates better networking, some people feel it's creating this void.
So I love the way he keeps plugging my gigs. I mean, Tomorrowland is one of ours, and this technology has developed because the promoters have come to us and said, you know, how can we do this? How can we improve our image? How can we get ourselves out there? And branding is as important as access control or cashless. But in terms of the human contact, when these people are going through the gates, there's still human beings there. You know, they're not just herded through like cattle, you know, and if it goes red, you get zapped. There are people there talking to you, and that's one of the things I think all of us do. We all try and we all have customer service points where people can go and be helped.
And when we're talking about that human interaction, again, Toby, as a digital platform, how important is it for you to convey that there is ultimately in the background this human element? We're in your offices today, and we can see a team of people constantly working and working on this in the background that people who are interacting at the front end of things maybe won't see. So how important is it that collectively the digital industry, when we're talking about access and the ticketing process, maintains a human element to it in some way, shape or form?
Oh, massively. I don't think that people ever want to go to an event and not interact with a human being. I mean, that would just be, I mean, don't get me wrong, I have been to certain events where I wouldn't want to interact with the security staff, but I mean, it's a very key thing for us.
There's some people you do want to avoid, obviously.
Yeah, very much so.
RFID might make it impossible to avoid that person, but that's the only downside I can see.
And of course the flip side is that some people are actually uncomfortable, aren't they, with the ticketing process of arriving and showing a ticket and having it checked and having to speak to people. Some people are actually more comfortable the other way around, aren't they? That they feel more at home being zapped and welcomed in and thank you, and they can go off and do what they want to do.
Again, certain European countries like their anonymity. Again, the Germans are very private people, so trying to introduce and educate them on something like this when they think that the CIA and the FBI and every other government agency out there are seeing what they're eating for breakfast anyway, it's hard to convince people of how this is going to work. And we're not there to invade people's privacy. I mean, it's a public event. We're monitoring you at this event, and there are switch-offs that can turn off technology at the organiser's discretion at the end of the day, or even the delegates or the stakeholders' discretion.
Does it become difficult when you're managing, sort of slightly on a tangent, but does it become difficult when you're managing the data that's generated and collected by all of these processes, as opposed to the old traditional ticket, there's my ticket, thanks very much, you didn't know who the person was that came in through the door? Is it difficult to manage the data when you're working cross-country with all the different laws you've got to apply to? And every country now will have their own laws governing how data is managed and shared, particularly, and I think sharing is the key one here. There was new legislation brought in last year in Europe, I believe, and forgive me if I'm being vague on this, I'm sure you'll know more about it than me, but in terms of sharing information and data that's generated in Europe, particularly across to the US and vice versa, are there issues that have to be dealt with now? Are we getting too carried away and too worried about it?
Again, I think it's political correctness gone mad, as long as you're not abusing that information, but I suppose there's no way of knowing who's abusing that information, who you're selling that information to as well. For us, we're headquartered in Madrid in Spain. Have done for the last 6 years, but when we came to the UK, we had to put servers in Ireland under UK data protection laws itself, because having a server in Spain apparently was infringing on certain laws. Again, I don't know the details of it myself, just I know it was a headache to sort that out.
I'm going to bring in again, thanks for answering that, and it's sort of a little bit off tangent, and I'm going to go back to the actual practicalities of access management. and managing it themselves as an event organizer. And I'm looking particularly at a product called Flow that you guys do, Toby, at Ticketscript.
Yeah.
And essentially that's handing over this simplicity of digital access management directly to the organizer, isn't it? And actually reducing costs of staffing, I suppose, in some
It is
respects,
indeed.
isn't it?
I mean, Flow is an application we released 18 months ago. It's available on Android and iOS, and all you need to do, no matter how many tickets you sell, is just download an application to your phone. It utilises the camera and turns that into a scanner. So at any one time, if you have a random entrance that's opened up on the other side of a site, you know, if you need to do some accreditation very quickly, just download the application and validate a ticket then and there.
And is it important that really, that fundamentally, we make sure that we are keeping these processes as simple as possible, rather than overcomplicating them?
You use the word fundamental, and fundamentally, it should be simple. The simpler, the better.
Because again, I've said it before, I'll say it again. I've seen a lot of tech come to the market in the event industry that arguably could be guilty of being overcomplicating something that wasn't complicated in the first place.
I mean, I'm not referring to Toby's Flow because I don't know enough about that, but there are some serious problems out there with people coming up with an app and it going in, and when you start to look at what some of these apps are doing, it's not us that's sucking the information out of things. You know, it's a lot of these apps are sucking information off people without them knowing.
But from a hardware point of view, going back to Flow, Toby, you're utilising something that, from a hardware point of view, everybody's got in their pocket.
Everyone's got in their pockets. You're quite right.
You know, companies not going out and having to invest massively in scanners and PDAs and touch points and things like that.
Yeah. And just to touch on a previous subject, which is, you know, kind of related to Flow as well, the information that we do gather and the information that we do collect when we scan a ticket, when we sell a ticket, Ticketscript contains that. We don't sell that information on, and it's retained in the UK. The only people that have access to that is the client and ourselves.
Yeah. So that the promoter gets access.
Yeah, quite.
But they're the sole benefactor.
You can't control. You can't control what a promoter does
with the data.
Yeah.
And with the information.
This is quite true.
Yeah, but that's
unfortunately,
that's the.
It's where T's and C's come in.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the fine print, isn't it?
And again, going right back to one of Carl's first comments, I think again a subject, T's and C's and controlling the data once it's been handed over, a subject for another debate, another day perhaps. We're going to bring to a conclusion this particular episode of Talking Events. And thank today's guests. Toby Dier from Ticketscript, thank you for joining us, Toby.
Thank you for having me.
Carl Martin from Intellytics, thank you very much for your time today.
No, pleasure. Thank you.
Ross Melinn from Ticketea, thanks very much for joining the Talking Events podcast and being on today's show. We will tweet links to all of the guys at companies and organisations from the @TalkingEvents Twitter feed, so that if you've got any questions or would like to get in contact directly with our guests today, you can do so. You can subscribe to the Talking Events podcast via iTunes. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel, Event Industry News, and a video of today's podcast is also going to be available on eventindustrynews.co.uk. Thanks again to our guests. You've been listening to Talking Events.